challenge wherever we may be. We're also going to just explore the concept of resilience and its impact on sustainable performance. And as part of doing that, we need to recognize what happens in our brain and body in response to uncertainty. And as entrepreneurs and as people in business, it's important for us to be able to come back to a place of groundedness and being centered in order to overcome any adversity that comes our way and deal with uncertainty. So that's quite an important piece. And we're also going to look at a few techniques to help you deepen your resilience. So it would be good just to hear from you, when you saw this webinar, what was it that drew you to it? What was it that, made you think, oh, that could be helpful or interesting? If you could just put that down in the chat box, that would be helpful for me also just to connect to as we move through this session. So please, let's try and make this as interactive as possible and just enter anything that comes up for you in the chat box or any questions you may have as well. So just a little bit about, this world that we find ourselves in and this world of change and constant change. It is volatile. There's lots of instability. There's a lot of uncertainty. We don't actually know a lot about what the future is going to look like. We're working it out along the way. And that speaks to the level of complexity that we are living with. It's really hard to predict what's going to happen in December, let alone now. And I'm speaking specifically here around COVID-19, but there are other spin-offs from that. So it's really hard to know what our business is going to look like in the next few months. It's also quite an ambiguous world where we do not actually understand what causes certain things. There are very many options that we can follow in moving forward. And in that, there's also something that's quite uplifting because there are very many options available to us, but we need to be able to recognize what those are. So what I'm hearing you put in the chat. I'm just looking through the chat, and what's coming up is, and what drew you to this workshop is really the times that we find ourselves in, and just wanting some strategies, and also feeling a lack of motivation. I think that there's lots of COVID fatigue at the moment, where people are feeling very drained, also working in a boundaryless world. It's very difficult to keep, as Meg, you were saying over there, I think it is Meg, sorry, it's Alicia, that lack of motivation. So it's important for us to understand what happens for us in any change. And this is based on the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And it's really, she did a lot of work on death and dying, and death is the ultimate change in life, especially for those who are left behind. And through that, we go through a process of transition. And the same is true for any change that we may be experiencing. And initially, we don't quite see who we can be at the end, right? So when the change actually happens, so when we said there's lockdown, I'm just using this as an example, we may have felt anxious or even some resentment at being forced to be at home. We may be in a place of apathy, which is like that lack of motivation, which is part of our journey in finding what that future can actually look like. It's a process. It's very messy here at the bottom of the curve. It's uncomfortable. And that may have also been what brought you to this session, is, how is it that I can actually explore ways of seeing things a little bit differently. So I think, if I can ask you all just to think back on when you first heard about lockdown and COVID-19. I know for myself, I had lots of plans for 2020, and the year hasn't quite worked out according to plan, according to what I even thought it would look like. But I'd like for you just to think back and just think about what happened for you in those moments. What did you think? What did you feel? And what did you do when you first heard about lockdown and its impact on you, on your daily life? And I'm just going to give you to think about this, and you can put it in the chat. If there's anything that comes up for you, anything you'd like to share.
Can I ask, please, is it possible, Alana,
Yes.
have you received, please, I've put in the chat my comment about resilience. Have you received it? Because I put in the chat.
Sorry, I'm just going to look.
My name is Odette.
Odette.
Odette, I can't see it.
Okay, so then after I put in the message, what do I click on in order to send it? Must I click on Alt H, or how do I? Because
enter. You have to press enter.
Enter. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Is it now gone? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we've got it now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'll press enter. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Yeah. So I think that as I see, or some of the comments in the chat, a lot of what people are feeling, that sense of loss, anxiety, is this, and even alternating with denial, is this actually happening to me? Feeling disoriented. And Odette, your comment there around, it's really difficult when there are not enough good vibes. So we really are impacted and influenced by how others are also experiencing the world at this particular point in time. The interesting thing is negativity is very contagious. Positivity is a little less contagious. And that's part of the need for us to become more resilient, is to be able to, someone else's negativity need not be ours. And it's about knowing, the difference and finding our boundaries with that. But a lot of what everybody is saying, speaks to our emotional response to this change, this event. Yeah, so thank you everybody for sharing exactly how it's impacted you. So what's actually happened is this initial response, and this is why it's important for us to understand our brain's response to this change or to this event, is that until we've had an opportunity to really make meaning and sense of what this means for our lives moving forward, we often react from that brain stem, that survival brain and the emotional brain. And if I look at a lot of the comments, a lot of you have come in from an emotional space in terms of the feeling of shock, suspicion, panic, the fear of the future, the anxiety, the confusion or disorientation. So that's all our emotional and survival response to the event. And in these moments, we haven't yet had an opportunity to really think about or allow our rational brain to come in and make sense of what's happening to us. So some key points on brain function is that, our reactions, and it's exactly what you were saying, Odette, are shaped by people and how we fit in. So we really influence one another. And that's also why it's so important for us to about resilience, not only in terms of our own resilience, but also our impact on others. For those of you in the workspace who are engaging with other stakeholders or customers. It's really, how do you stay positive in these times? Because how you show up and how you are reacting in this moment can also shape how they're going to be in relation to you. The other thing is that, this constant feeling of threat triggers emotions. So interestingly enough, our brain is wired to pick up these external stimuli and to react in a way to protect us. And that, was very helpful hundreds or thousands of years ago when we were in the wild, looking out for, potential danger. But this hypervigilance also makes us quite anxious. And what we call it is an amygdala hijack. So what we really need to do is to shift from this knee-jerk reaction into a more way of thinking about the world. It does take a lot of more energy, so we actually avoid doing too much of this just naturally. If I ask you all now just to fold your arms in a, just as you would naturally do, if everybody can just fold their arms, and I now ask you to fold your arms in the opposite direction, yeah? What do you notice? What do you notice in doing that? And you can put it in the chat. How easy is it to do it in the opposite direction? Is it easy? Yeah, takes a lot more consciousness to do it. Absolutely. So our brain is wired to and operates from a place of habit. So it actually takes a lot more consciousness and awareness to shift some of those habits. Interestingly enough, Carolyn, you've said it's very easy, and that's a very unusual response. Yeah, usually people do find that they keep going back to the same way of folding their arms. And that was just a simple exercise just to highlight to you how our brains are actually habit forming organs. So we do have to break some of those habits. We have to think about, what sits behind some of our anxiety or some of our reflex reactions to threat. And we all have a story. For some of us, it could be about, maybe the choice that was taken away from us, being forced into a lockdown. For some of us, it could be about our financial security. What's going to happen to my business? What's going to happen to the world, to the economy? It could also be about our self-esteem. Who am I without my work? What is the value that I have to add? It could also be about feeling completely out of control, where control is an important thing for me as a person. So for all of us, we have a different story that sits behind our reflex reaction. So part of the work in deepening resilience is being able to identify what our story is. And, our story really frames some of our thinking. There's a lovely quote by Sir Bernard Shaw when he says that my life is a series of atrocities, none of which have yet materialized. This is where we have to catch ourselves. We have to really see, to what extent is what I'm experiencing real? And there's a lot of real stuff that we're going through, but to what extent am I allowing these stories to influence and shape how I am feeling and being in the world? Also, when we speak about resilience, what we're really trying to do here is to shorten our threat response. So it is very natural and normal to feel all this fear, panic, anxiety. We're not saying don't feel those things, but it really is about shortening the time it takes to get back to that neutral mood. Because when we are in a place of feeling threatened, it's very difficult to think straight. It's very difficult to think about opportunities, possibilities, and to think creatively. That part of our brain actually shuts down. What's interesting is the research shows us that a reward response, so when you maybe sign a deal or get an acknowledgement for work well done, we get back into a neutral mood quite quickly after that. But that threat response for some of us can take a lot longer. And some of that is also because of the stories we have around security, control, freedom, whatever it may be. So the one piece in deepening our resilience, and I know that this is a very quick intro into deepening resilience, and there may be more work that each and every one of us needs to do in changing ourselves. It's big work. But I think that there's something about becoming aware of when we're not able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And this is a quote by Viktor Frankl. He, I'm sure most of you know, he was a Holocaust survivor. He wrote a number of books, and he was very curious when he was in the concentration camps. He's also a psychiatrist. He's written a book, Man's Search for Meaning. Why people who came into the camps who looked really strong and fit, strong and fit compared to others, but stronger than others, didn't survive compared to some of those who looked really weak and frail. And what he came up with is, just how important it is for us to have meaning, and how meaning and purpose really helps build resilience. So at the heart of this is the thinking that there may be certain things that are completely out of our control and even out of our influence. And the only thing that we can really work with is ourselves in how we respond to the situation. So if we think of COVID-19 and its impact on your businesses or on you as an individual, it really is about, what is it that I can shift in the way in which I am responding to the situation? Because certain behaviors may no longer be serving me in this situation. So maybe just something to think about, and you may not have the answer now, but you can take this way as a reflection. But what is it that you can do to help you minimize any perception of threat, especially when there is uncertainty and setback? And just something to start thinking about. I don't know if anybody's got anything to add here. I'm just going to look. My response is controllable, easier said than done. Absolutely. Yeah. And absolutely, Andy, this is all much easier said than done, and that's why I'm saying that this does require quite a bit of work, and sometimes we need the support of someone in doing this work. But part of it is about really understanding what sits behind our reflex threat reaction. Okay, so some actions, and this is just a suggestion. It doesn't need to be the only way of doing this, but firstly, it's not to suppress emotions. That's quite an important piece. We need to acknowledge how we're feeling, our anxiety, our panic, and in those moments to really slow ourselves down. And it is this, this pause and counting to 10 before responding, this deep breathing. It's an old wives' tale, but it really does work. It just slows down our whole parasympathetic nervous system. And that's why self-care in these times is also so important. So whether you do yoga or walk in the park or whatever it may be, there's something about coming back into the present moment that can help us also navigate some of these emotions. And also we can start to work with the shift once we've started to label our feelings. So part of what we're wanting to do in naming the feelings is start to reframe, our situation. So rather than saying, things are disastrous, there's no business at the moment, it may be about, how do we reframe that a little bit more positively? And, things that may be difficult right now. It's not about being unrealistic. And it's the reframe of that could be, I need to think about new ways of doing things, new way of work, as an example. And that's, if we already start speaking to ourselves in that sort of a way, we start to see things a little differently. What's also very helpful is to try and see it from a different perspective, because, and how we do that is often by seeing it from a position of how maybe somebody you really admire sees it, a different person, a mentor, or maybe a situation the situation now that you're needing to overcome. If you had to cast yourself forward 10 years time or back 10 years time, just from a different period of time in your life, would it be any different? Just really trying to take a little bit more of a positive view. And yeah, also just to think about anything else that may be helping or hindering your reactions. So I know you are really struggling with working from home, especially those with small children, because they as much as it gives them flexibility, they're also very distracted. And so some of that may be about, what are some of the contracts I need to make with people at home around space that I'm working from, or support that I need to get in helping me take care of certain activities with my children. And these are just some examples, but it's for us to think about ourselves in context. So I just want to go back here because I see that there's some questions here around what about position and equity. So position is, so where I feel that my position may be under threat. So maybe it's my position in society, my position in a business, and that's where positional power may be quite important to me, and I might have a story around that. Excuse me. Equity is about fairness. So I may have a story around, being treated fairly, and maybe, and I'm just going to use this as an example. I'm one of many children, and I felt that I was never treated fairly growing up. That same story is going to represent itself in later parts of my life. It may look a little different, but I have something around being treated fairly, as an example. Or in South Africa, we do have a big narrative around equity, just from where we've come from and where we currently are. Okay, so what are some of the things that we can actually do to build our resilience? And this is where I'm going to start sharing with you some tools and techniques. I think the first thing is really to accept, that we do live in this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. Things don't happen in a linear way. For some, if I had to ask you the question, if you imagined your life at age 19, think back to how you imagined your life from age 19 and to what it currently looks like. Has it turned out exactly according to plan? Yeah, probably not. I would imagine not. Things have turned out differently, and that's because we live in a complex world. Life by its very nature, is complex. So some of the things that we need to do in working with a VUCA world, and we've started to work with that already now, I've just touched on it really, is, really being able to stay positive, to frame things a little bit more positively. And an easy way of doing that is to, if I had to ask you what's challenging right now, see what your response is to that. And then if I had to ask you now, what are some of the opportunities that you see in this new way of working? Yeah, you're going to have a different response to that question. So how we frame our questions, how we frame our issues, our challenges, that's, if we can frame them in a little bit more of a positive way, that's already helpful, because it helps us to think about what our opportunities and our possibilities are. There's a lot of work, and some of you can Google it, on appreciative inquiry, and that's a whole school of thought which really, is about asking questions in an appreciative way, and by doing that, you to a very real but positive way of unlocking possibility. Dealing with uncertainty, that I think that the more we resist this fact that we live in a very uncertain world, the more difficult it is for us. So there is something about accepting uncertainty and then being able to manage it a little bit better. And somebody asked, sorry, I thought I saw meditation, but part of how we do manage uncertainty in terms of self-care is really, taking care of ourselves. How are we sleeping? How are we exercising? Are we making time for some sort of meditation or yoga or exercise? Those are all tools that are available to all of us, which help us build resilience and in being able to deal better with uncertainty. And for all of you, if you think of yourselves before and after any exercise, how you may be thinking about a particular issue, it often shifts. Mindfulness absolutely is also a very important tool.
She's talking.
Hello. Okay, so the other two areas really to look at is our focus on purpose and to build agility. In a VUCA world, we really do need to be very mindful of what our underlying purpose is. And it's not about being fixated on a particular direction or goal, but it's about saying, this is a particular direction I'm wanting to work towards, and really finding ways of nudging yourself towards that direction, your purpose, finding ways of realizing that. And part of that is also, part of how we do that is also about building a bit more agility. There are lots of things that will work out, and there are lots of things that won't work out. And it's how do we take those things that haven't worked out and say, well, what have I learned from this? And what would I like to do differently moving forward? And even that is a reframe. That's about staying positive rather than saying, I'm no good at this, or I can't do this. It really is about saying, okay, so what do I do now? It is what it is. There've been learnings through this negative experience, and what are those learnings? So a tool that is really quite helpful in staying positive is this framework, which is, helps us to be realistically positive. And I think that's important. It's not about saying the world is wonderful, it's going to be okay. It's about really saying, how can I realistically be positive at this moment in time? What are some of my strengths? And we really need to look at those very closely. So, what are the capabilities? What are, some of my advantages at this particular moment in time? What is it that I know how to do, or what is my experience? What sort of skills and resources have I got at my disposal that can really help me in this moment? And also to tap into some of your personal values, in those, thinking about those 5 steps that you've taken to get to where you are currently now. If you think about them in a little bit more depth, you will pick up that there are some values that sit behind those. They're things that are important to you. So if I think about myself, some of those personal values are learning and growing. That's always been important to me. And it's a strength because, it's through my passion for learning and growing that I have changed what I do along the way and what I focus on. So part of it's also about looking at, also what's within your control. What are those things that can actually help you? So that is an area really to unpack. And what I would suggest is, post this call, is that, everybody really looks at these questions and reflects on them and unpacks them a little bit further for yourself. When I, and equally, so I need to look at those areas that I may not be that strong in. They may be my weaknesses, and maybe like, what sort of disadvantages do I have in this situation? And what do I do that may not bring added value to my work? And that's, whether perhaps it's procrastination, or if I think about myself, I've been, very reluctant to do videos, which a lot of my colleagues are doing and posting on LinkedIn and on all other forums. And I've got to really, find out for myself, what is it that is getting in my way of doing that? Maybe there's some resources and people that I can engage with that will help me build more confidence in doing that. So it really is about things that I need to maybe learn or know more about in order to improve. So it's looking at it from that perspective. Opportunities, when we start to look at our opportunities, that's really where we start to look at, well, where is this going to take me to now? And what are some of the new knowledge? What is some of the new knowledge and skills that I can learn? So I suppose, one of the things that's been very interesting for me is I was working with an organization before lockdown, and they were really toying with this idea of more flexible working, because people were saying that traffic is really difficult, and it's, really gets in their way, and it's taking away from their productivity. Lockdown then happened, and they had to transition into this more flexible remote way of working. So yeah, that was, so technology may be a new skill or a new way of working that can actually pivot some businesses. I can speak for myself. An opportunity here for me is I no longer need to be in a particular place to do the work that I do. So as I said to you earlier on, I'm sitting in Umhlanga and I'm able to be away and and actually still do work. Likewise, I have clients, who are sitting in the UK, and we can still work, obviously because the time zone's good. And we've also got somebody here, I think it's who's sitting in the UK. So there are opportunities that have presented themselves through this crisis, if you'd like to call it that. but there may be information and skills that I need to learn to help me in this moment. Likewise, I need to look at some of, the obstacles that is in my way, and yeah, and some of what we really need to ask ourselves, is, what may be the future demand for my current offering? And this is part of strategic thinking. It's part of thinking about the future within the current context and starting to take action with what we think the future may look like, knowing that it may not pan out that way. And that's where experimentation becomes so important. But with experimentation also comes our need to be able to deal with failure or mistakes, and really being able to reframe those in terms of what it is that we learn through those experiences. Yeah, so there are some nice questions here just to reflect on and think about in terms of yourselves. And perhaps once you've done this, you can really then say, what are some of my key insights that I'm learning about myself or understanding about myself, and where I'd like to be, which is the next step in building resilience, is really about, we need to have purpose. And this is really based on the work of Simon Sinek. These 3 circles, some of you, the golden circle, you may already be aware of it. But when we think about a VUCA world, we really need to be quite connected to our why. Why is it that we do what we do? So if you think of Apple as a brand, part of their why is about pushing boundaries. How they do that is, by developing a user interface which is very intuitive. And what they deliver is a laptop, cell phone, things that other brands also deliver. The what could be quite generic, but it's the why and the how that differentiates us. Disney World also, they have a, their why is about creating happiness in the world. Yeah, and how they do that is through the entertainment that they provide, allowing people to really step into a real fantasy world, and also even by the people who are cleaning the streets. Some of what they have, they've been taught is to smile at people who are in the street so that they can bring happiness to them. They're connected to the why. So it is important for all of us to, think about why it is that we do what we do. What is your why? And if I've done some of this work for myself on my own why, and my why is really about unlocking potential, engaging potential. I really believe that we've all got potential waiting to be realized, and that learning and growing is what unlocks that and also empowers it. Yeah, so that's part of my why in the world. Okay, so there are some questions here also for you to reflect on. And I'm not going to ask you to do it now, but if you're wanting to take away something to think about your why, these are some questions in terms of why do you do what you do? What is it that brought you to what you do? What is that thing that really gets you up in the morning? What is the difference that you hope to make through what you do? Yeah. And what would people miss if you or your business were gone? So part of this is really about being able to articulate what it is that you stand for. And what we're really wanting to do in doing that is to create our own vision story, so that you're able to share with others why it is that you do what you do, that you're able to share your dream with them. And by doing that, you can fuel passion. and yeah, and really be able to start to realize your reality. It does need to be something that is quite short and memorable, because it's something that you've got to start to embody and really feel. So yeah, that's just also something to think about, because when we're more connected to our purpose, we know why we're doing what we're doing every day. Even though there may be days that things don't work exactly according to plan, we have an overall purpose. So what we're wanting to do in a VUCA world is really, or some of the secret to dealing with a VUCA world is our ability to be more agile and deal with uncertainty. And part of becoming more agile from a business perspective is about sharing our vision, and maybe also in sharing our vision, having a shared vision with those important stakeholders or employees or teams, that we really share that vision. We're working towards the same thing at the end of the day. It does require us to be more collaborative. We don't have the answers all ourselves. In a complex world, and we live in a complex world, we learn and grow through conversation with other, through engaging with other, sharing of ideas, working together. We really can be greater than the sum of our parts, and if we allow ourselves to be. And to try and foster as much as possible an agile culture in our place of work. So what that means, on a practical level is, how do we respond to mistakes? Or how do we respond when things go wrong? If we're agile, we are more able to reframe it positively. We are, can be a bit more solutions focused, and think about what our next step could be. So in order to be more agile, what we're really wanting to do is be more curious. We really have to see what's going on out there. And I think that at the moment that's even more relevant, because so many businesses are changing at this particular point in time, and offerings are changing, needs are changing. So we really have to be resourceful and curious, looking at what's going on out there. We've got to really build our external networks so that we can collaborate and learn from one another. Through that, we spark ideas, and we think about doing things maybe a little bit differently. And there's also something about holding our view of the world, or the model that we have of the world in our heads, a little bit more lightly. There's something about acknowledging that this isn't the actual world. The world that we live in may be a little different to what we expect or have in our heads as how things should be. And with that, we really need to be open to new ideas, trying new things, small experiments that can nudge us towards our purpose, not just towards the direction we're wanting to move in. And really to be able to do these short experiments quickly and often, so that we can really learn through them. So part of that is also about having a little more flexibility in our plans, where we're able to review things maybe at shorter milestones, and be able to say, okay, where are we with this? Are we still on the right path? Should we be doing something differently? It's really about having a little bit more of a flexible and agile approach. Yeah, we don't know where the next competitor is coming from. I think DSTV, if you think about Netflix today, just the way digital transformation is changing the world, all the platforms that are now available and being developed. Yeah, what does that mean in terms of where our next competitor may be coming from? So We have got some time for some questions, but yeah, just what I would suggest, post this workshop, because this was really just a little bit of a touch point. We only have had an hour, but I would suggest that if in deepening your resilience, you look at completing the positive realism worksheet. Reflect on some of your why questions, so that you can formulate your own vision story, and also to think about what could be your next small experiment that could help you move towards your desired direction. And an experiment, remember, the very nature of an experiment is that we're trying something out which may or may not work. So it's also about holding it in that way, not being too attached to the outcome. Oh, so I'm not sure if there are any questions.
If everyone would like to unmute themselves, because there are still a couple of questions in the chat box.
What if either your values nor your beliefs about who you are or what you do raise you out of apathy? Yeah. So, yeah, too exhausted to do the work. So that's where self-care becomes so important. To what extent are you able to take care of yourself, able to have a break? Because we have to disconnect in order to reconnect again. So you may want to engage with someone around working that out a little bit more for yourself. But there's something for me in that question which speaks to the need for self-care, because we can reevaluate things when we feel better about ourselves, when we feel more rested, etc. What if you already know your purpose deeply and have been doing and living it, that COVID did not affect this? Sorry, I'm just trying to make this a bit bigger. And yet now it's too tiring. So I'm not quite sure if it's that COVID did or didn't affect this, but there's something about it being too tiring. Alicia, that's what I'm hearing in that question.
Yeah, I've been going through something so interesting. Something you said earlier made me wonder if I had some post-traumatic stress syndrome symptoms, because the way my personality works is that if there's a crisis, no problem, I take care of it. But then after the crisis, then my body reacts. So we've been through the first wave of COVID. During that time, I did a lot to bring my children as much up to speed as possible, because they were 2 years behind the English system. And I worked very hard on my own projects. And in fact, I have the most wonderful projects that I love, that I'm excited, or at least was excited to be doing. And I just can't, I just can't. I'm too tired.
Yeah. So something, and I think that, yeah, that's interesting, because under different circumstances, you may have felt differently about those projects. So it's not the projects itself. What I'm hearing you say is it's more about you and where you currently are at, and perhaps you have a PTSD, and perhaps it is something to speak to somebody about in diagnosing it, whether it is or isn't, or whatever it is. It's just this fatigue. But I think that what you're sharing actually really resonates with me, because I'm finding that a lot of people are feeling this fatigue at the moment. And this is what's so tricky in being able to re-engage. People are missing that human connection. They're missing that connection to purpose. Why are we doing this? It feels like each day is the same. And that's where we need to do things differently, whether it be that you're able to, change location for a while, or go into the office for a while, or
Yeah,
whatever
no,
it is.
that might
We need to
relate
find
to,
small changes.
that might relate to
Sorry?
other people on the on this call. For me, it doesn't really. It's
Okay.
just I'm just not being myself, and I don't know why. Because as I've written there, I'm the most resilient person I know, and yet
Right.
all of a sudden, I even had my cousin Limor. I don't know if she's still on this chat. I even spoke to her about doing just one thing a day for my work, and I couldn't even manage that.
Yes.
So I don't know. This is just I mean, and uh, this is the second day that I've upped my meds. So I'm really doing everything I can think of, except what to get myself out of it. And I'm also too exhausted. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
So if you suddenly come up with a thought,
So,
it would be welcome.
okay, thanks, Alicia. Yeah, I think that it's something you need to be a bit more curious about and explore a little bit further. What's coming up for you